Sounds good.
Saro, welcome to the Dialogues.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. It's been I feel like we've been trying to get this one off the ground for a while now, so it's good to
Yeah,
finally, and fingers crossed, we could actually complete this one.
sure, for sure. For
Um,
sure. Looking forward to our discussion.
so we haven't actually had a pharmacist on before, so I'm really excited actually to get the perspective of a pharmacist, because I think it's a role in the whole diabetes community and a role within CGM use community that like probably doesn't necessarily get a lot of airtime. I mean, I think patients think about doctors and doctors think about patients, but I think sometimes pharmacy gets, fulfills a role, and a very important role, but doesn't always kind of get the seat at the table, or doesn't always get the credit that pharmacy is due, I think, in the whole, treatment of diabetes.
Right, right. I agree, and I'll be happy to go over my perspective on, from pharmacy standpoint, why diabetes excites me. Managing diabetes patients excites me. And
That's
so,
good. We'll definitely get to that. So I think it would be really good for the listeners and the viewers to hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your background. Do you want to start? Just give us a little bit about your credentials and kind of where your pharmacy career started.
for sure, I went to college, pharmacy school in Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. Graduated about 2006. Been a pharmacist for 14 years. I started getting involved in patient care, direct patient care from clinical standpoint, managing patients about 10 years ago. Since then, I've been doing ambulatory care pharmacy management and creating programs and managing patients, getting involved in preventive care, population health management, and my role has grown to from being pharmacist to director of the program to vice president of the operations for managing the medication therapy management programs, disease management programs, preventive population health management programs, mostly focus on chronic conditions, which include diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, diabetes, COPD, asthma, but these days mostly diabetes, which is connected to hypertension, heart failure, dyslipidemia, especially that now these days we look at the patients as a whole. When we look at the diabetes patients, we manage their blood pressure, their lipids, their heart failure, status if they have that disease, COPD, asthma. So we look at the patient from holistic view, if you may. So it's gotten more exciting, and for the pharmacist being involved in actually being able to intervene clinically and with medications, that's the part that it's getting more and more common um,
And
practice.
is that because that sounds like an expanded function or role for pharmacy to what I think traditionally has been the role, taking more of a clinical kind of engagement view and handling some of the clinical aspects. Where's that come from? What's driven that? Has it been that clinicians are overwhelmed with the kind of amount of work that they need to do, and that actually passing off some of the clinical work that pharmacists are capable of doing helps actually manage the load across the system?
That's actually one of the main reasons, with the physicians being bombarded with so many patients, and having so little time, 15 minutes to a half hour every 3 months to or 6 months or even once a year to see a patient, manage 10 different disease states, and they have very little time managing a specific disease, focused enough. So that's why other healthcare providers like pharmacists have stepped in, have been given the permission per set guidelines to be able to actually manage these patients And when I say managing patients, we've gone from just checking their blood sugar levels, collecting blood sugar levels, to actually making insulin dose adjustments and
Okay.
insulin pump dose adjustments. So that's where we've come from since I got involved in 2010 till now.
So I was just asking about carrying out those functions, those clinical functions, and whether, you know, it's pretty standard across the pharmacy community. Is it in all levels of pharmacy, or are there specialized levels of pharmacy where you carry out those functions? And do pharmacists need extra training and so forth?
Yeah, obviously you would need extra training, either by institutional training like residencies or clinical practice, or actually hands-on training, which I experienced working with endocrinologists with the patients, managing on basic dosing, and then moving on to pump dosing, and being trained to move to a space that you can actually with confidence, under supervision of a provider based on the guidelines approved, following a protocol, manage these patients. Basically under supervision, but also at the standalone way that I can manage the patients I have currently with a specific guidelines approved.
And does that mean you are having to work closely with diabetes nurse practitioners or with endocrinologists? Is it a team-based approach? Are you having to kind of communicate back to the endocrinologist what you've done? Is there a centralized record that you work from?
Yeah, we actually we work from the electronic medical records centralized location, working with social workers, care managers, diabetes certified diabetes specialists, and nurse practitioners, and following up with the provider on our assessment, on our intervention. So all the whole coordination of care is done in one platform for the page, for everybody to be on the same page as to what's the progress with the patients, and what's the status of a disease state, control based managing, and the medication of it.
It does seem to make a lot of sense, and it actually seems to be a positive move to have pharmacists take on some of that workload. I mean, and to have you engage with the patients a bit more and understand them, because your core role, which is to helping manage medication,
Mm-hmm.
understanding some of the clinical backdrop, I imagine helps you actually help them manage their medications more effectively.
So to that point, actually, that's the part that excites me. Believe it or not, we are able to, touch about, I would say, 100 patients, 100 diabetes patients a day, make insulin dose adjustments, and few times a week, and enough dose adjustments for us to get the A1C for these patients and timing range under control within 2 months, from going from A1C from 10 to 8, 14 to 10 in 2 to 3 months. And
Yeah.
that's just because it's crazy, but we're not doing magic. We're just following with these patients, instead of putting the patients on 10 units of Lantus, let's say, and continuing and seeing them again in 6 months. We do the dose adjustments so often, 3 times a week, twice a week, that it's the management and progress of the dosing is so advanced, and so many times so intense, basically, that it's almost guaranteed we get the A1C under control, especially if the patient is compliant. And
And
then you add to that the nutrition aspect of it with the CDE, certified diabetes educator, with the social worker aspect of what foods the patient has access to, what they can eat, and the exercise routine. We get the patients under control. We're able to spend the time, teach the patient to be on insulin, what is the insulin, show them what it is, talk to them, and put them on the new type of insulin therapy. Something that it helps the providers for them to focus on other disease states while we're managing the diabetes part.
and so what does that look like? Are you seeing patients in a clinic face to face on a daily basis? Are they coming into you and sitting in a room with you?
So we've experienced that for sure. We definitely prefer the patients for us to see them of course, the first time with COVID, it's more kind of virtual now, but we still see the patients. We
Yeah.
prefer face to face,
Yeah.
but if that's not possible, virtual. But then after few virtual ones or few face to face ones, we go on to having phone calls, reviewing the blood sugar levels, reviewing the current dosing, reviewing the hypoglycemia symptoms, ups, downs, how the patient feels, and adjust the insulin medication dosages, oral or insulin, on regular basis on the phone.
And are these patients mostly new patients and you're helping them kind of get up to speed with managing insulin, or are they actually patients across the full spectrum of length of since diagnosis?
I would say, we have combination. The new patients that, they're at the point of starting on insulin after 3 orals or 4 oral medications. We have patients that have been on insulin, but not maximally tolerated dose, and they haven't gotten the benefit. We have patients with A1C above 14, 15 for many years, being referred for, compliance issues, being needing that follow-up and encouragement. We have patients that want to get off medications and insulin. I mean, they're
Yeah.
not type 1, they're type 2s, but with exercise, routine, and nutrition management, we're able to actually reduce the medications, number of medications, number of dosages, and in some cases, actually take them off of insulin.
And so just thinking about type 1 diabetics and the ones that you're seeing, what are some of the bigger challenges that you're having to help them with?
So on type 1 patients, knowing the fact that, I was reviewing the facts in the United States, just alone, each year we have about 40,000 new type 1 diagnosed patients and diagnosis. And so we have more patients obviously being diagnosed. And with those patients, we face sometimes more pediatric population, and that are, not, they're on the therapy, but they're not either in compliance by choice or in compliance, not in compliance because of their schedule. So with those patients, we start seeing more hypoglycemia and urgent care visits, and we try to work with them on the best options of the insulin therapy management and what the foods that they eat, or evaluating them for possibly being a good candidate for pump usage.
Okay. Are you guys initiating pump? Are you prescribing pumps? Are you able to
So
do that?
yeah, that part of the programming and initiating the pump, we recommend the pump patients if they qualify based on the criteria. They've been on insulin, they know how to do the injections, they know what to do, they're compliant to some extent, and based on some criteria, we recommend the patients to be on pump, various pumps based on their needs, and with the endocrinologist's help, they prescribe. We go through the first programming with the endocrinology office, and then we follow up on the programming and dose adjustments on the pump.
I want to jump onto CGM stuff soon, because I think that's an area of expertise of yours, and I'm really keen to hear from you about that. Just before we jump onto that, just a bit more on the pumps. How many different pumps are available in the US at the moment? Do you know off the top of your head?
So definitely Tandem, Medtronic, um, Omnipod, Vigo. We have several pumps, but the majority of them are, either we see Tandem patients or Medtronic patients.
Okay.
Either they get prescribed or they get referred to us. About 3 or 4 types of pump patients we see or we recommend.
Okay. I've been type 1 for 15 odd years now. I'm not on a pump. When I talk to people from pump companies, they all say you should be on a pump. My HbA1c is around 6.9. I'm not too unhappy with that at the moment. But like, certainly the idea of a pump is in the back of my mind, and maybe eventually I'll get there and I think I'll get there when I can't manage anymore, when it starts creeping up and I'm doing all the things that I can do, manually injecting. Then I'll go, okay, maybe I need a pump. Maybe it's a pump that's going to help me to manage my HbA1c and my time in range. What's your general view on kind of when people should be looking at getting onto a pump?
So, I mean, we see majority of pediatric patients getting on pump just for the ease of use and less injections,
Yeah.
especially in school. If they're not home, the pump does the work. For lack of number of injections, the pediatric population they have to do, or we see adults that, are just not being able to manage their type 1 because of hypos or other side effects, or not just not getting the A1C under control. They're not able to regularly follow the insulin injection routine, and so those become the good candidates for pump, especially with programming of the pump that you can now with these days we can program the pump so many periods of the day with so many small dosages per hour, per half hour, and they're able to just get on the pump, get with the day, and get benefits from the auto injection, and the compliance standpoint, and get their once is under control.
So are you initiating many adults onto pumps?
We do for sure. Yep.
And what kind of results are you seeing? Like, what's the impact generally in, when across the breadth of patients that you're seeing initiate as an adult? What's the experience and the results that you're seeing?
Um, we're actually, to be quite honest, um, we're gathering data right now to to work on a study for us to see before and after on various pumps and number of patients that we have. But what we see right now is two things: A1C improvement and patients being more compliant with the insulin in the aspect of being happier. The quality of life is better, less injections they have to deal with, and the pump helps them achieve those results. So it gives that extra, assistance during the day, especially if the patient is busy or it's a PEDS patient. It gives them that extra, help and motivation, basically. So they definitely, we see those two, A1C improvement and compliance goes much higher with diabetes control.
And is there much out there in terms of data, whether we're talking about pumps or whether we're talking about CGMs, what's the real world data now that we're seeing in terms of improvements in whatever measure we're talking about, whether it's A1C, whether it's time in range? Is there a pretty substantial amount? I mean, I know there would be randomized controlled trial data, for example, the Libre or the Medtronic or the Dexcom will have trial data that shows an impact on A1C. But are we at the stage yet where we have real world data that's actually able to conclusively say these have been out in the community now and we're collecting data and we know that the randomized control outcomes are being mirrored and we're seeing these improvements? Do we have that ability to look at real world data yet for pumps and or CGMs?
Um, I would say for pumps, I'm not sure. Well, for pumps, I would say we have more data on reducing hospitalizations and ER visits. For CGM devices, we see more compliance with blood sugar levels, time in range, and A1C improvement versus hospitalization. So each CGM or pump, they're not quite there as far as studies goes that can be randomized big enough to be, um, 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 you could translate to whole population in the world and to show reduction in hospitalization and blood sugar improvement. But they're definitely there. There have been studies, randomized control trials on Libre, Dexcom, and other CGMs showing A1C improvement for sure. And on the pump side, reducing the ER visits, urgent care visits, and
Okay.
on both sides, improving of the patient's compliance. That's the kind of exciting part for so many CGM patients and pump patients being able to be compliant um, on their own for the first time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really exciting, actually, the tools that we have at our fingertips now. We're really lucky, I think, to be patients and clinicians and pharmacists and healthcare providers in an era when we have this technology and these tools available to help us manage. It really, it's probably weird to say it, right, but it's a lucky time for us to be having this disease.
Yep, it's definitely true. I mean, I was looking up some information. I mean, we started from first blood glucose test strips in 1908, first blood glucose monitor in 1970, first CGM in 1999, with then going to Medtronic, Libre, Dexcom, and the evolution last 30 years from first blood glucose in 1970, last 40 years,
Yeah.
from first blood glucose monitor to now CGM, different versions. I mean, we went from Dexcom G4 to G7, coming soon, Libre to Libre 2 and Libre 3. And it's just, as you said, we're in a period of lucky time as far as technology goes. More patients have way more options to manage their disease.
Absolutely. And part of the way that we connected was actually through something that you'd written, looking at CGMs, a bit of the history and looking at each CGM. So I'm really keen, and I think it's really useful for our listeners as well to kind of get a somewhat unbiased perspective on CGMs and the differences between each, and just love to kind of pick your brain and get you to kind of give us the gamut of detail across the CGM spectrum, if that's not too much too much kind of information to put out at one time.
Sure. I mean, you mean comparing CGMs or simply CGM to
Yeah,
test the market?
a bit of I think kind of tell us a little bit about each one that you work with anyway. Maybe we'll start there, then we can jump on to actually talking a little bit
Sure.
about what you know about what's coming up. But just kind of really keen to kind of understand your perspective on the CGMs and the pros and cons for each, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see Libre patients, we definitely see Dexcom patients. We see patients going from Dexcom to Libre, Libre to Dexcom.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting.
Definitely, we see that often. And for both of them, I could say, I mean, with transmitter, sensor, and reader, or with just reader and sensor devices. Um, the aspect that excites me is not if you're on Libre or Dexcom, but the fact that it opens up the patient's eyes to the technology exists, going from 4 to 6 times testing every
Mm.
day to every 10 days, every 15 days, or in the case of ever since 90 days. It's like, it's crazy. Like, if you've been testing your blood sugar levels like every day, 4 times a day for the last 10 years, all of a sudden, no more. It's on your arm. You're good to go with the reader. That's the part that really excites me to for these patients to know about the technology and be on it. The downside I see right now is, and the problem right now is, it's not approved, at least in the United States, it's not approved for all patients.
Yeah.
So the patients have to meet some criteria to be on CGM, and that's as we go forward, as more CGMs come to market, that's gonna go away also. But that's the problem I see on diabetic patients. But as far as CGM goes, you get on Dexcom, Libre, you monitor, you actually do interventions for those blood sugar levels. You get your A1C under control.
Yeah, look, it's not cheap. I don't get. I'm on Libre. The Australian government does reimburse for under, I think, 21 or 18. I can't remember. I think maybe 18, and also other high risk patients, pregnancy. So some of the CGMs are reimbursed. For me, not reimbursed, and I'm just about to order another, 10 boxes of Libre, and that's going to cost me $1,000. And that's what's that? That's 20 weeks worth for so it's not, it's definitely one of those expenses that, like, you go, that's not a small expense for me. It's definitely worthwhile, but it's definitely a chunk out of my bank account.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate parts we see right now. I mean, we're in a lucky period of time to have this technology, but unlucky to not have access to for everyone. But we have some patients. Actually, majority of our patients, the health plan that they go through covers their reader and sensors and transmitters almost completely. So they may have some copay, extra copay that didn't have at all for test strips, but comparing the ease of use and quality of life versus paying some extra, it brings it brings a different life to these patients, and just like you said, it's $1,000 extra for you, but I mean, testing 4 times a day, 6 times a day,
Oh yeah.
or pay that much and have the quality of life. I think it's the balance is tilting more towards now as we move forward to it's becoming more affordable enough that quality of life wins over the pricing.
Do you think we'll see, or should I say, when do you think we'll see full reimbursement for all, and maybe in the US never, because even insulin isn't really necessarily available to everyone, unfortunately. But when will, and actually that's probably a different topic we could cover, but when do you think we'll see a broader reimbursement from insurers and maybe governments for CGMs? When will the realization be there? Will it be when the cost comes down, or will it be when the impact on long-term healthcare spending is seen, that we'll see broader reimbursement?
I think I was thinking if you would ask me this question 2 years ago, I would say in next 5-10 years. But I see last 2 years I've seen way more health plans covering it in at least in the United States, way more health plans covering it fully 100% or enough percentage for these patients to be on. So with the data coming as clinical trials showing A1C improvement, ease of use, quality of life improvements, way more health plans, way faster than we thought, are getting CGM on their formularies and providing to their patients. From the end cost, perspective of patients ending up in the hospital and costing so much money to the healthcare system versus CGM, it's starting to make sense more and more, much faster than we thought.
Yeah, it's good. It's exciting that more and more data is mounting up that's saying if we invest in these things now, there'll be a benefit to society and to the healthcare dollar, down the track. This will make a difference to these types of chronic diseases that cost the community a lot of money in terms of healthcare spending, and we can redirect more of that spending towards more preventative measures.
Exactly. And CGM or no CGM, the part that excites me about diabetes, why I'm involved in diabetes, is it's it's preventable, it's fixable, it's manageable. If you don't have diabetes, you may be able to prevent it. If you have diabetes, it's manageable and it's fixable. So the good news is that the part that really excites the pharmacists getting involved is getting hold of the patients, telling them that diagnosis of type 1, type 2, it's not end of the world. You're not dying. It's very easy to fix. You just have to get used to a new routine, new schedule. And that's the part that with pharmacists being involved, whether with CGM, insulin, or test strips, or exercise, or nutrition, it's a disease that you can handle. It's one of those diseases that you can actually get better, get your A1C under control, versus hypertension, heart failure, COPD that gets worse as you age because of organ damage.
It's absolutely really exciting. One thing I touched on earlier, which is insulin, I think it's probably it's a cause that we are interested in, that I'm kind of fascinated in. It's a political topic in the US. Bernie, I think, is a real advocate for change in and amongst other politicians for change in insulin access for all. Um, from a pharmacist perspective, I mean, probably no one is closer to insulin than a patient and a pharmacist. What's your attitude, I suppose, to the state of affairs around the fact that there are individuals out there who can't afford for healthcare, for insurance probably reasons, can't afford insulin. They're either sparing their insulin or they're not getting insulin. And individuals are actually dying in a Western country because of an inability to afford. I mean, is it an accurate perspective that I've got? Am I misunderstanding it? Is it more on the patients not managing it well, or is it actually a real system issue that that people don't freely have better access to get insulin?
It's definitely more on the system issue and affordability of the insulin. It's still expensive. It's covered by many insurances, but it's not as cheap as oral medications. It does cost some copay for the patients, and we have patients not being able to receive their insulins or want and the supplies that they need, or being able to afford it. But at the same time, now we're seeing with the political changes and discussions, we're seeing more assistance programs coming into play, helping those patients that can't afford their insulin with either sample program or some type of extra coverage program. We see way more help and assistance coming to these patients.
And so how might this ever be fixed? How might insulin be more accessible to people who have problems with finances?
I think
I think you make a point about the causes that exist, and that's great, but they're only kind of plugging gaps, and they're doing their bit. But like, how do you think we get to a point? And this is a US, I think, and we can probably cite other parts of the world like sub-Saharan Africa. But like it's the US, I think, is an example of where, like, if you can't fix this problem there, how can you fix it elsewhere? Like, what's your view on how this might ever be fixed?
I mean, it's getting better. Last few years since I started managing diabetes patients in the last 5 years, it's gotten much better than, to a point that I hear affordability issue on insulins, but not as much as before. So with more insulins in the market, with more of these insulins going generic, and having more competition and the pricing dropping, at the same time with the CGMs and raising awareness of diabetes overall, and how it could be actually prevented or it could be managed enough not to cost the society so much.
Yeah.
I think we're getting to a point that next few years we will have much less of insulin affordability, or to your point of what you mentioned, less cost issue on the affordability of the insulin pump.
Yeah.
So, for these patients.
You've got to run. I know you've got some other things to do. I'm really grateful to have you on and actually to get this thing done, because we've been trying to do it for a while. I'm really happy that we've had a perspective from a pharmacist on this interview, or on the interview series that we're running. So thank you for your time. Before we wrap up, is there anything in terms of, it's mini pharmacy, I think, is there anything you want to say about the work that you're doing within the organization that you work for?
I'll put some I'll give my feedback on overall, diabetes management for the audience
Yeah.
for this conversation. Um, with the pharmacist involvement, we see how easy it is to manage uncontrolled A1C, uncontrolled blood sugar levels. It's just a matter of focused attention. That's all it is. If there is a focused attention on nutrition, exercise routinely and
Yeah.
daily, managing your patients, the patients managing their diabetes themselves,
Yeah.
and with the help of the pharmacist being more available to them, it's a disease that is there's a hope. There is a huge hope for these patients. Being able to go into under control and stay under control for the rest of their lives, knowing the fact that they have diabetes, but not to worry about it. So that's the part that really excites me about diabetes. Whether whichever organization it is or whatever products you're on, as far as insulin, CGM, or pump, it is a manageable disease that I've seen people. If you have people with type 1 participating in triathlons,
Yeah.
marathons, you know, it's doable. It doesn't have to be the scary disease. We've passed that point. We just have to have focused management with the help of the pharmacists, with the help of the healthcare providers, and with the help of the patient
Yeah.
routinely. It's a disease that you can just put it aside and know you're diagnosed with it, but go about your life without having to worry about it.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a really good message to end on, right? That like the biggest win that a patient is going to have isn't going to be the pharmacist or the doctor or the nurse. It's going to be their own responsibility, because like, if you're not completely responsible for self-managing, then it's going to be very hard for a healthcare provider to really support you. So absolutely, like I'm an advocate for personal responsibility when it comes to this. And there's no shortage of really high performing individuals out there, and professional athletes, right? Just about every sport is going to have type 1 diabetics who are out there training every single day. And it'd be interesting to see what their HbA1cs are. They'd have to be, if you're an athlete training every day, it'd have to be your HbA1c would have to be like pretty amazing, I'm guessing.
Right.
Lots of there's still challenges, right? Like your body's reaction to exercise can be hard to get your head around. But I think to your point that it's not a scary disease, and you can go out and you can kind of like do really whatever you want to do. You could go and be an explorer, you could be a professional football player. I mean, there isn't really any reasons to be held back as a diabetic.
Exactly. Just just get the help, get the routine going. It's manageable.
Saro, awesome to chat. I really appreciate your time. Yeah, thanks very much, my friend.
For sure, for sure. Thank you,
Take
Pete.
care.
Thank you. Appreciate it.